The morning flight was supposed to be calm, the kind of journey where people close their eyes and forget the world for a few hours. Passengers slowly filled the narrow aisle, placing bags in overhead bins, greeting the cabin crew with small, tired smiles. Among them was a quiet woman who walked with steady steps, almost unnoticed. She wore simple clothes, carried a light backpack, and chose a window seat near the middle of the plane. No one paid special attention to her, and she preferred it that way. The captain greeted everyone with a warm voice, promising a smooth journey ahead. People relaxed into their seats. A young boy pressed his face to the window, an older couple whispered about their vacation, and a man in a business suit typed furiously on his laptop. Everything looked normal, predictable, safe, but life often shifts when no one expects it. About an hour after takeoff, the sky began to change. The bright blue slowly turned heavy and gray. Passengers noticed small bumps at first, a light shake that made drinks tremble in plastic cups. The cabin crew walked fast now, tightening belts and securing loose items. The quiet woman watched them carefully, her eyes focused like someone who had seen storms before. The turbulence grew stronger. A loud thud under the plane, and the lights flickered once, then steadied. A few passengers gasped. The man with the laptop shut it hurriedly, holding the armrests. The boy near the window looked scared and leaned close to his mother. People waited for the captain to speak, hoping for reassurance, hoping for something normal. When the intercom finally clicked on, the captain's voice did not sound calm anymore. It was strained, tight, fighting to stay steady. He explained that the plane had hit a sudden weather disturbance stronger than expected. He asked everyone to remain seated, promising updates soon. But the passengers could hear something in his tone, something he was trying hard to hide. Fear. Minutes passed like hours. The shaking became worse. The plane dipped once, sharply, and someone let out a small cry. Oxygen masks did not drop, but it felt like they could at any second. The cabin crew stayed brave, yet their eyes spoke a truth they could not say aloud. Then came another announcement. The captain's voice cracked slightly as he admitted they had lost partial control of one system. He said they were trying to stabilize the plane, but he could not guarantee how long they could keep it steady. A cold silence fell across the cabin. People clutched their armrests, some whispering prayers, some staring straight ahead. In the middle of all this, the quiet woman remained still. She breathed slowly, her gaze focused on the seat in front of her, as if she were calculating something. Her hands did not shake. Her heartbeat stayed calm, almost trained. She looked around, noticing every detail, the angle of the plane, the sound of the engines, the rhythm of the turbulence. It was a look not of fear, but of analysis. A heavy jolt shook the aircraft again, and passengers screamed. The captain's voice returned, but this time it held something else, a painful honesty. He said they were running out of options. He said they were doing everything they could. He paused for a long second, then spoke 5 words no passenger ever wants to hear. We may not make it. The cabin fell into shock. Some cried openly, others froze in disbelief. The cabin crew tried to comfort people, but their own hands trembled now. The boy near the window buried his face into his mother's arm. The older couple held hands tightly. The man in the business suit whispered that he had family waiting at home. Through all of this, the quiet woman slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. A flight attendant rushed over, asking her to stay seated, but she gently shook her head and whispered something under her breath. It was not panic, it was confidence. The attendant hesitated, confused by her calmness, but allowed her to stand for a moment. When the turbulence eased slightly, the woman walked toward the front of the plane, holding onto seatbacks as the floor moved under her feet. Passengers stared at her, wondering why she seemed so sure while everyone else was breaking apart inside. She reached the curtain that separated the cabin from the cockpit area, and another crew member stopped her again. She leaned close and spoke softly so only the crew member could hear. Whatever she said made his eyes widen. He looked at her again, uncertain, then hurriedly knocked on the cockpit door. Inside, the captain was fighting to control the plane. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he held the controls. When the crew member entered and whispered the woman's words, the captain froze for a moment. He turned sharply, staring through the doorway at the quiet woman waiting outside. She didn't look scared. She looked like someone who had been here before, someone who knew exactly what was happening. And that was the moment the plane's story began to change. The captain opened the cockpit door only halfway, just enough to see the woman waiting outside. The dim light inside made his tired eyes look even heavier. He had been fighting the controls for almost 20 minutes, and every second felt like another battle he was losing. But when he saw her, standing with calm shoulders and steady breath, something inside him paused. He asked who she was, his voice low but urgent. The woman answered quietly, not raising her tone even as the aircraft shook again. She explained that she had flown fighter jets for years, that she had trained for situations far worse than this, and that she understood exactly what the plane was doing right now. She didn't say it to show off. She said it because lives were slipping closer to danger with every passing moment. The captain stared at her as if trying to separate truth from fear. He didn't have the luxury of time. Outside the cockpit, passengers braced against the violent shaking. A loud metal groan swept through the cabin, followed by a sudden drop that made everyone feel weightless for half a second. People grabbed each other instinctively, eyes wide with dread. A baby cried somewhere near the back. The plane felt like it was fighting itself. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot struggled with failing instruments. Screens flashed warnings one after another. Altitude numbers jumped unpredictably. The right engine showed unstable readings. The storm outside pushed against the aircraft like invisible hands trying to tilt it sideways. The captain asked the woman one question. "Can you help us recover control?" She nodded slowly, not promising miracles, but offering something everyone on that flight had lost hope. The cockpit door opened wider, and the woman stepped inside. Passengers watched in confusion, whispering among themselves. Nobody knew her name, but they sensed something different now. The flight attendants exchanged glances, unsure whether to trust the situation, yet feeling a strange relief when they saw the woman's confident posture. The cockpit was cramped, filled with blinking lights and constant alarm tones. The woman took the spare seat behind the captain and leaned forward, studying the controls. Her eyes moved fast, trained, picking up every detail. She asked for a quick update, and the co-pilot explained the damage: partial system failure, engine imbalance, and severe crosswinds from the storm. The plane was losing altitude faster than expected. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, not to panic, but to think. To remember the training that had become a forgotten part of her life. She recalled nights flying through storms, engines failing, alarms screaming at her, and instructors shouting commands. She breathed deeply and opened her eyes again, sharper than before. She directed the co-pilot to check manual stabilizers. Her tone was steady, guiding, not overpowering. She asked the captain to shift power to specific controls, to counteract the unpredictable dips. He followed her instructions, trusting her more with every small improvement he saw. For a brief moment, the shaking softened. It wasn't calm, but it was less violent. The captain turned to her again, amazed that something had changed in just seconds. But the woman shook her head. It wasn't enough. They were still losing altitude. They needed to redirect into a safer air pocket before the storm pushed them into a zone they would not escape. Outside the cockpit, passengers noticed the slight improvement. The older couple unclenched their hands. The man with the laptop lifted his head. People whispered, wondering what was happening up front, wondering who the woman was. Then suddenly, a new jolt hit the plane, sharp, fast, and louder than before. the lights flickered again. The plane tilted left, and several passengers screamed as drinks spilled and belongings slid across the aisle. The cabin crew struggled to keep people calm, but fear was stronger than their voices. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot announced that the storm had pushed them into another dangerous zone. The woman leaned forward, gripping the seat. She scanned the radar, noticed a narrow path of lower turbulence, and told the captain they had to aim for it. It was risky, but staying where they were was even worse. The captain hesitated only a second before agreeing. He followed her directions closely, adjusting angles, fighting the storm with every turn. The woman guided him through it, explaining each move in simple, sharp instructions. The co-pilot supported them, monitoring engine health and altitude. Plane shook violently as they attempted the maneuver. The storm roared outside, lightning flashing near the windows. The woman gripped the armrest, eyes locked on the radar. She knew they were seconds away from either breaking free or losing control entirely. Passengers felt the plane tilt again and thought it was the end. A child cried out for a parent. A man whispered a prayer. The cabin filled with the sound of fear mixed with rumbling thunder. Then, slowly, the shaking began to ease, not fully, not completely, but enough for people to notice a difference. Inside the cockpit, the woman pointed to the radar screen, showing they were entering a safer pocket of air. The instruments steadied slightly. Altitude loss slowed. The captain let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, for the first time since the disaster started. The woman allowed herself a small, quiet breath of relief, but she knew this was only the beginning. The storm was not done with them yet. The damaged engine was still unstable, and the plane still needed a safe place to land. The real test was still ahead of them. The cabin had finally quieted a little. People were still afraid, still tense, but the sudden drop in turbulence made them breathe again. No one knew exactly what had changed, but everyone felt it. The boy near the window lifted his head just enough to glance outside, only to see thick clouds swirling like gray oceans. The plane still trembled, but compared to before, it felt almost gentle. The quiet woman, now sitting inside the cockpit behind the captain, did not let herself relax. Her eyes moved across the radar screen again and again, studying every inch. The storm was enormous, stretching miles in every direction, and they had only slipped into a temporary pocket of calmer air. It wouldn't last long. She could already see the next wave of turbulence forming ahead, like a dark wall waiting for them. The captain asked her what she saw. She hesitated only long enough to choose her words carefully. She explained that they had one window, just one, to escape the worst part of the storm. But to reach it, they needed stable power from both engines, or at least the closest thing to it. Right now, the right engine was still struggling, vibrating under the pressure. If it failed completely, the plane would be forced downward faster. Then they could recover. The co-pilot ran another system check. Warning lights flickered in a stubborn pattern. The captain sighed heavily, knowing exactly what that meant. They were flying on borrowed time. For a moment, silence filled the cockpit, broken only by the beep of alarms and the faint rumble of thunder outside. The woman leaned closer, studying the engine readings. She had seen this type of instability before, during training missions, mid-air simulations, and once during an emergency landing years ago. She knew what it meant, and she knew the risk. She told the captain they needed to shift the airflow manually to support the failing engine. It was a maneuver rarely used outside military flights, but it could buy them precious minutes. Minutes they desperately needed. The captain stared at her. "Are you sure it will hold?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the controls, then out the front window at the storm raging ahead. The truth was complicated, but she kept it simple. "It might hold long enough," she said softly. The captain nodded, jaw tight, and began adjusting the controls as she directed. The co-pilot worked beside him, monitoring every reading, calling out numbers like a heartbeat. Slowly, very slowly, the vibration on the right engine lessened. It didn't stop, but it steadied just enough. The woman exhaled quietly. It was a small victory, but victories mattered in the sky. Back in the main cabin, passengers felt the difference too. For the first time in what felt like forever, the plane moved forward with a bit more steadiness. A woman in the front row whispered that maybe things were getting better. A man 2 rows back nodded, though his hands still shook. The baby who had been crying earlier finally calmed when a flight attendant rocked him gently. But the calm didn't erase the fear. Everyone knew they were still inside the storm. The crew, no longer able to hide their anxiety, began checking on passengers again. The lead attendant quietly told them that a former fighter pilot was helping the captain. The news traveled through the cabin faster than the plane moved. People sat straighter. Hope, once lost, began to flicker like a candle. Trying to survive in the wind, one passenger asked the attendant, "Is she really a pilot?" "Yes," the attendant replied. "And she's the reason we're still in the air." Inside the cockpit, the woman looked at the radar again. The narrow path she wanted to reach was shifting as the storm moved. They had to get there, and they had to do it before the wind closed it off completely. She instructed the captain to increase their angle, but carefully too sharp, and the engine might give out. Too soft, and they would drift deeper into the dangerous zone. Her voice stayed calm, almost warm despite the chaos. It reminded the captain of the radio tone used in military training videos, steady, clear, and confident even when everything around them burned. Another wave of turbulence struck, shaking the plane hard enough to rattle the overhead bins. Passengers shouted in panic. The captain's hands tightened on the controls. The co-pilot steadied his breathing as he corrected the altitude. The woman reached forward, placing one hand on the back of the captain's chair, not to take control, but to steady herself. She gave the next instruction quickly and clearly. The captain executed it immediately. The plane tilted, then leveled again. The radar screen flickered, then slowly. The dark red storm zone shifted behind them. The plane had reached the edge of the worst turbulence. The quiet woman leaned back for the first time since entering the cockpit. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. The captain let out a trembling sigh, half relief, half exhaustion, but it was not over. The storm was still around them. The engine was still unstable, and they were far from any airport. They needed a landing plan. They needed a miracle. The co-pilot checked the distance to the nearest runway. The numbers were not good. The woman stared ahead through the front window, at the streaks of rain sliding across the glass like falling silver lines. They had escaped the storm's grip for now, but the fight to bring everyone home alive had only just begun. The storm finally began to fall behind them, shrinking in the windows like a dark monster losing its grip. Passengers could feel the difference. The air no longer tossed them violently, though the plane still trembled from damage and strain. People whispered to each other, confused but relieved, asking the same quiet question: were they safe now? Inside the cockpit, the answer was far from simple. The captain wiped sweat from his forehead. Though the air conditioning was on, the co-pilot's hands hovered over the controls, ready for anything. The woman sat behind them, breathing slowly, her eyes fixed on the blinking screens. She knew storms could be escaped, but a damaged plane still needed to land somewhere. And landings were where survival truly proved itself. She asked the captain which airports were within reach. The co-pilot listed them, but every option had a problem: too far, too risky, too much distance with an engine that could fail again at any second. Fuel was still enough, but not generous. They had burned more than planned fighting the storm. The woman leaned forward, studying the digital map. She spotted something: a small emergency airstrip used mostly by training aircraft. It wasn't big, it wasn't ideal, but it existed. The runway was shorter than commercial planes preferred, but not impossible if handled with precision. She asked if the plane could reach it. The captain hesitated. His experience told him it was a gamble. But the other options were worse. He radioed the control tower of that distant airstrip, explaining the situation. Static filled their ears, then a voice replied, nervous but willing to assist. They were cleared to attempt emergency landing procedures. The woman closed her eyes for a second, steadying her thoughts. Back in the cabin, passengers felt another change, the slight sinking motion that comes when an aircraft begins its controlled descent. Some looked out the window and finally saw blue sky peeking through the clouds. A few even smiled through their exhaustion, thinking the worst was over. The older couple held hands, tears in their eyes. The boy near the window whispered that the plane sounded quieter now. A flight attendant, though still shaken, walked through the aisle reminding people to stay seated. She wore a brave smile, but her eyes revealed she had also heard the captain's earlier words, the words about not making it. The woman in the cockpit watched every reading on the screen. The right engine still vibrated unevenly, but it was manageable. The left engine carried most of the burden, humming louder, almost as if trying to protect everyone on board. The captain lowered the altitude again. The ground, still far below, appeared through breaks in the clouds, patches of fields, roads, and clusters of buildings. The woman inhaled deeply. She remembered flying at low altitudes in her past life, when everything needed to be perfect. She never expected she would use those skills again in a civilian plane with frightened families behind her. Another warning beep echoed. The co-pilot checked the reading when patterns ahead were shifting again. Not a storm, but unpredictable gusts. Enough to complicate the landing. Enough to make everything harder. The woman whispered instructions to adjust their alignment. Her voice remained calm, but carried a firmness that reminded the captain she had once been responsible for her own aircraft. Her own crew, she understood. The sky, like others, understood their home. The captain followed her guidance without argument. Every move mattered now. As the plane descended further, passengers could finally see land clearly. Relief washed over some of them, but the descent came with new bumps. The plane shook lightly, then hard again. A man grabbed the seat in front of him. A mother hugged her child close. The lead flight attendant murmured encouragement, trying to keep everyone still. The cockpit grew quieter, the way rooms do when everyone inside is holding their breath. The woman asked for one final check on the right engine. The co-pilot reported it was holding, though barely. The woman nodded, her mind already calculating what landing angle would lessen the strain on that side. She outlined a landing plan short. Runway, controlled descent, reliance on flaps, and minimal braking until the last moment. The captain listened, then nodded. He had flown thousands of hours, but never imagined he would share a cockpit with a passenger who carried the calm of someone trained to face death in the sky. The landing gear deployed with a heavy clunk. The passengers felt it and gasped, unsure if it was good or bad. The plane shook again, but the woman's voice guided the cockpit like a lighthouse in the dark. A few passengers began whispering prayers again. The older couple held each other. The boy squeezed his mother's arm. The cabin felt like a single shared heartbeat. The ground neared. The runway appeared in the distance, small, thin, and surrounded by fields. It looked like a narrow lifeline, drawn across the earth. The captain tightened his grip on the controls. The woman leaned forward, watching every inch of the runway, every line, every shadow. Steady, she said softly. The co-pilot called out the altitude. The wind pushed them slightly to the left. Correct it gently, she instructed. Hold. Hold. The plane dipped lower. Passengers closed their eyes. The wheels approached the ground. And in that moment, suspended between sky and earth, between fear and survival, every soul on the plane waited for the truth of their fate. Asterisk. The wheels touched the ground, but not smoothly. The first contact was a hard jolt, the kind that made everyone on board gasp at once. The plane bounced slightly, lifted for a breath, then slammed down again with a second heavier thud. Loose items in the cabin rattled, and passengers gripped. Whatever they could, armrests, hands, prayer beads, anything that made them feel connected to the earth they weren't yet sure they would reach. Inside the cockpit, the captain focused on the runway ahead. It wasn't long or forgiving. It approached fast, too fast, and the damaged engine created a stubborn pull to the right. The co-pilot called out airspeed and distance with a voice trying to stay steady. The woman leaned forward, gripping the seat as she guided them through the descent. "Keep it centered," she whispered firmly. "Don't fight the bounce, stabilize after it." The captain corrected the alignment, breathing sharply through the tension in his chest. Outside, dust and bits of grass lifted from the sides of the runway as the heavy aircraft pushed forward, refusing to stop easily. The wind hit them again, pushing from the left this time. Everyone on board felt it. Passengers screamed as the plane tilted slightly. The crew shouted for everyone to brace. The older couple hugged each other tightly, whispering something between fear and hope. The boy near the window buried his face into his mother's arm. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared again, a sound no one wanted during landing. The woman's voice cut through the noise. Calm, clear, sharper than fear. "Raise the left flap now. Bring it down steady, steady." The captain obeyed instantly. The plane shifted, correcting its tilt just enough to regain balance. The runway raced beneath them, but the plane was still moving too fast. The woman glanced at the map taped near the captain's seat, something she had noticed earlier. She remembered that the emergency airstrip had a soft patch of grass extending beyond the paved runway. It wasn't ideal, but it could save them. "Use the whole length," she instructed. "Let the brakes wait until the final stretch. You brake too early, we lose control." The captain nodded, jaw clenched, sweat running down his temple. The plane thundered across the runway, wheels shaking violently, the metal body trembling from stress. The co-pilot called out the remaining distance meters, shrinking faster than they could react. Passengers felt the ground rushing beneath them. They didn't understand the details, but they understood one thing: they were still going too fast. Fear returned, thick and heavy. The captain waited for her signal. The woman watched the runway's end approaching closer. Closer, too close. "Now," she commanded. The captain applied the brakes hard, but not all at once. The plane jerked, tires squealing, the cabin shaking as the force pushed everyone forward against their belts. Bags tumbled from overhead bins. A baby cried loudly. Someone shouted a prayer. The boy squeezed his mother's hand so tight she felt her fingers numb. The plane slowed, but not enough. The runway ended. The plane rolled into the soft grassy patch beyond it, kicking up dirt and fragments of earth. The wheels dug deep, slowing them sharply. The aircraft tilted forward slightly, engines roaring in protest. Then finally, after an eternity of fear and noise, it stopped. Silence fell. Not a peaceful silence, but a stunned one. A silence filled with shaking breaths, trembling hands, pounding hearts. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Everyone listened to the stillness, unsure whether to believe they had survived. The captain released the controls slowly, his hands shaking. The co-pilot leaned back, covering his face with both hands in disbelief. The woman closed her eyes, letting her breath finally fall into a calm rhythm, something she had held back for too long. Then the captain turned to her. "You saved all of us," he whispered. She didn't answer with pride or tears. She simply nodded, her expression soft, almost tired. "We worked together," she replied. "That's what saved us." Back in the cabin, passengers unbuckled shakily. Relief washed over them like warm sunlight after a long, dark night. Some cried quietly. Others laughed in the way people laugh. When they escaped something they weren't sure they would survive. The older couple held each other with tears streaming down their cheeks. The boy looked at his mother and whispered, "We made it." Flight attendants moved through the aisle, checking for injuries, comforting people. The lead attendant finally allowed herself to smile, a real one this time. She approached the front, wanting to thank whoever had been helping the captain. She expected to find a professional rescue team or a trained official, but she found a quiet woman standing near the cockpit door with her simple backpack in her hand. The woman didn't stand tall like a hero. She didn't pose or wait for applause. She just breathed deeply and stared out the window, as if letting the sky go. The captain stepped out behind her, touching her shoulder gently. "We need to tell the passengers what you did." She shook her head lightly. "They don't need details. They just need to go home." The captain looked at her with a kind of respect words couldn't capture. She had walked into his cockpit as a stranger. She walked out as the person who made the impossible possible. Outside the plane, emergency vehicles rushed toward them. Airfield workers stared in disbelief at the large commercial plane sitting on their small training strip. Inside, passengers prepared to step onto solid ground, but none of them knew yet who the quiet woman truly was or how deeply her past had shaped the miracle they had just lived through. The plane sat crooked on the grassy field, engines slowly cooling, metal still trembling from the rough landing. Outside, rescue vehicles approached with flashing lights, sirens muted by distance. Inside, passengers waited for the doors to open, many gripping the seats with shaky hands even though the danger had passed. The flight crew moved carefully through the cabin, helping people stand, checking children, offering tissues, blankets, and small words of comfort. No one complained about discomfort or delays. Survival had humbled every soul, but amid the relief and noise the quiet woman stood slightly apart. She didn't rush to leave the aircraft. She didn't celebrate. She simply looked around, making sure everyone else was okay before thinking of herself. Her calmness felt almost unreal, especially after what she had just done. The captain stepped out of the cockpit and walked toward her. People noticed him immediately, his face pale but eyes filled with gratitude. He stopped beside her and spoke softly. "You should come with me," he said. "People want to thank you." She shook her head gently. "Let them focus on getting out safely." The captain paused, struggling between respecting her silence and wanting everyone to know the truth. Before he could respond, a flight attendant approached with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "You saved us. You really saved us." The woman simply replied, "Anyone trained like me would have done the same." But the truth was heavier than her words. Not everyone trained like her could have stayed that calm. Not everyone would have stepped forward in the middle of chaos. The plane door finally opened, and fresh air rushed inside. Passengers slowly made their way out, feet sinking into the soft ground outside the small airstrip. Some kissed the earth. Some cried. Some hugged strangers they had met only hours ago, but now felt deeply connected to. As people descended, they stairs, whispers grew louder. "Who helped the captain?" "I heard it was a woman, a fighter pilot. Someone said she used to be one. She saved the whole plane." But when they looked around for her, she stayed behind in the cabin, allowing others to exit first. She didn't want attention. She wanted quiet. The boy who had hugged his mother earlier stopped at the door and glanced back. He saw her standing near the aisle, looking out the window. He tugged on his mother's hand and whispered, "I want to say thank you." His mother hesitated, then nodded softly. They walked back to her. The woman met their eyes with surprise, not expecting anyone to return. The boy stepped closer and said, in a tiny but sincere voice, "You helped us. You helped the pilot. Thank you." His mother's eyes glistened. "We owe you our lives," she whispered. The woman crouched to the boy's height, giving him a gentle smile. "You were very brave. she said. "Remember that." The boy smiled shyly, then followed his mother off the plane. One by one, passengers were guided away toward safety. Medical staff checked blood pressure, treated cuts and bruises, and reassured frightened travelers. The airstrip workers stared at the large aircraft that had somehow landed on their humble runway. Many shook their heads in disbelief. The captain, after ensuring his crew was safe, returned to the plane to speak with the woman again. She stood near the cockpit door, as if still guarding it. He cleared his throat. "Emergency control wants to speak with you." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "They want to know how you kept the plane steady when our systems were failing." She blinked slowly, then looked out the window at the distant emergency vehicles. "Tell them the team worked together. That's all they need." The captain frowned, not in anger, but in admiration and confusion. "Why don't you want recognition? You deserve it." She looked down at her hands, the hands that once guided military jets, hands that carried memories she rarely spoke about. "I flew in a life where attention wasn't something you asked for," she said softly. "You just did your duty and hoped everyone got home." He studied her face, realizing that whatever past she carried wasn't simple. It was heavy. It was shaped by skies far more dangerous than civilians ever see. The rescue team soon approached the aircraft, and officials asked everyone to move to a safe area for medical checks and statements. The woman finally picked up her backpack, ready to step off the plane. As she walked down the stairs, the passengers who had gathered below saw her. A ripple went through the crowd. Soft gasps, murmured thanks, heartfelt nods. Some reached out to touch her hand. Others pressed their palms together in silent gratitude. She nodded back politely, almost embarrassed. The older couple approached her too. The woman from the couple hugged her tightly, whispering, "You gave us another chance at life." The man wiped tears from his eyes, saying, "We'll never forget this." She smiled gently, but her eyes carried a quiet sadness, like someone who had seen too much sky, too much danger, too much loss in her lifetime. Medical staff insisted on checking her as well, but she kept insisting she was fine. Eventually they let her sit aside near a fire truck. Alone for the first time since the ordeal began, the captain joined her once more, lowering himself onto the step beside her. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. Finally he asked, "Why did you stop flying?" She looked straight ahead at the horizon. The sky was clearing now, sunlight breaking through the fading clouds. Her voice came out soft, almost fragile. "Because one day," she said, "I didn't make it in time to save someone." The captain's breath caught. Her past was deeper than any of them knew, and none of them realized that today's miracle was her way of rewriting a pain she had carried for years. A chance life gave her again. Asterisk. The sky above the small airstrip slowly cleared, turning from storm gray to a soft, forgiving blue. Emergency workers moved around the plane, checking equipment and stabilizing the area, while passengers gathered in small groups, each processing their own survival in different ways. Some cried quietly, some called their families. Some just stared at the distant mountains, letting the weight of the moment settle inside them. The woman sat on the low step near the fire truck, her backpack resting beside her, her hands loosely folded. She wasn't trembling, but she wasn't still either. Something inside her was shifting, something she had tried to keep locked away for years. The captain sat silently next to her, not pushing her to continue her story. He sensed that her last sentence wasn't simply a fact, it was a wound. After a long, quiet stretch, she finally spoke again. "I used to fly rescue missions," she said softly. "When weather was bad or systems failed or pilots went missing, we were trained to get there faster than fear could grow." The captain listened without interruption. "One night," she continued, eyes fixed on the horizon, "we got a call about a young pilot. His aircraft lost navigation in a storm. I reached him. I saw his lights. I followed him through the clouds. Her voice tightened a little. But another gust hit, and I lost visual, only for a moment. Just a moment. Her breath caught, but she continued. When I saw the lights again, it was too late. His aircraft had already gone down. The captain lowered his eyes. He didn't know her story, but he understood the weight of a loss that lingers, that follows. You into every quiet room. She looked at the grass beside her, as if it were the wreckage of her past. After that, I stopped flying, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop thinking that if I had been 1 second faster, 1 breath sooner, he would still be alive. The captain clasped his hands together. You can't measure yourself by moments you didn't control. She didn't respond to that. Some pains don't argue, they settle like dust in the heart. Instead, she looked toward the crowd of passengers. I thought I left flying forever, but today. She paused, swallowing the emotion rising in her chest. Today, when the plane shook, something inside me moved. Not fear, not duty. Something quieter. Like life was saying, here is your chance to try again. The captain nodded slowly. And you did. But not alone, she replied. You trusted me. They trusted all of us. He smiled faintly. You showed us how. Nearby, passengers noticed her again. Word had spread. Someone received permission for a brief gathering so people could express gratitude. And slowly, gently, they approached. The older couple was the first. The woman hugged her tightly, tears falling freely. You didn't just save my life, she whispered. You saved every future moment I still get to share with him. Her husband nodded, his voice shaking. We carry you in our prayers now. The business traveler stood next, clearing his throat. I've spent years thinking about nothing but work. Today reminded me what actually matters. Thank you. A tired father held his baby close as he spoke through tears. You gave him a future. And you gave me the chance to see him grow up. The quiet woman listened, absorbed it, and held each word gently, as if afraid too much gratitude might break something inside her. Then the boy from the window stepped forward again, holding a small airplane toy that a flight attendant had given him earlier. He offered it to her with both hands. This is for you, he said softly, because you fly better than anyone. Her breath caught. She crouched down, looking at him eye to eye. Keep it, she whispered. Let it remind you that even in scary skies, there's always someone trying to help. He nodded and hugged her tightly before running back to his mother Dot as the crowd slowly stepped away. Giving her space again, the captain looked at her with quiet admiration. You know, he said gently, the world still needs pilots like you. She smiled, not a wide smile, but a small, honest one. Maybe, she replied, the world just needed me here today. He didn't argue. He had seen her in action. She wasn't just a former pilot, she was a lifeline. Rescue teams began guiding passengers toward buses that would take them to a nearby facility. The captain stood, preparing to follow, but turned back toward her. Come with us? She shook her head softly. You go. They need you. He hesitated. And what do you need? She looked up at the clearing sky, that same sky that had once taken something from her and today had returned something unexpected. I need to walk a little, she said, and breathe. He respected that. He gave her a final nod of gratitude and joined the others. The woman picked up her backpack, stepping a few paces away, her shoes brushing the grass that had stopped the plane. She turned once to look at the aircraft, a silent metal witness to her second chance. Then she walked toward the open field, into the calm after the storm, carrying her past behind her and her forgiveness ahead of her. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like someone who finally found peace by saving others the way she once wished she could have saved him. And as she disappeared into the sunlight, one truth remained clear. Sometimes, life gives you one moment to heal what broke you, And she had taken that moment and turned it into a miracle.